All right, Rabosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Nedarim, daf Chaf Dalid. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Yankee and Eliza Statman and Yissi and Rebecca Statman for dedicating the Shurim and Drashos this month in commemoration of the first yard site of their sister, Menucha Shendel Yehudis Zichron Lebracha Bas David Yosef. To thank Shmuel and Rabbi Karapkin for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the 25th yard site of Rabin's mother, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim Zichron Lebracha. And to thank Dr. and Mrs. Lussman for dedicating the shir today in commemoration of the 20th yard site of Mrs. Lussman's father, Moshe Leib Ben Chaim Zichron Lebracha. We hope that under the merit of our Talmud Torah, then Hashem will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. Now, we'll say with that, let us begin. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Okay, let us get started. Today's daf is Chaf Daled 24. We are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem on Chaf Gimel Amud Beis 23b. And we left off Ibariluhu. Two lines up from the bottom. So I'll say Ibariluhu. Again, I'll point out there's still more to do on the Kol Nidre Sugya. So Mir Hashem, maybe we'll find, maybe even over Thanksgiving, we'll find an opportunity in Mir Hashem to be ma'ayin into that a little bit, because it's such a riveting machlokes about Kol Nidre and about the mechanics of Kol Nidre working as a retrospective vehicle or a perspective vehicle. Which way are we going? Is it going for the past? Is it going for the future? Can you accomplish both? All right, so Emeretz Hashem, maybe Thanksgiving. Emeretz Hashem. Both say, let's go. Ibaylo. Pligi Rabban Aleid Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Olo. Here's the Shaila. Do the Rabbanon argue Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov or not? Both say, who's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? So remember again, he was the Tana of the Mishnah on Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph. Remember again how we got into this whole sugya. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov said that if I want to invite someone over for a seuda, and I want to be able to go ahead and employ a mechanism of a neder, and I don't really want a neder, but I just want to be able to turn the screws on them so that they come to me for Shabbos. So ultimately, again, I could say any neder that I'm going to vow in the future, ultimately, again, should be batal. So Elazar ben Yaakov was the one who introduced to us this concept that one could make a tanai at some earlier stage, going ahead and having in mind that any future neder that I make should be batal. Again, so then we got into the mechanics. How does it work? Do you have to remember it, not remember it? Okay, but let's leave that on the side. But I will say, so do the Rabbanon agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov or not? That will say, if you take a look at the last ran on the page, the last ran on Chav Gimel Amud Beis, the ran writes, Ibayluhu, Pligi Rabban Aleid Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Olo Pligi. The Ikol Sapuke Bahachi Mishum, the Dilma Adchal Chamer Rabbanon Dinidre Zeruzin Havu, Ella B'mocher Velokeach, She'ein Pihem Velibam Shaveh. Da'af Mitchila Hayrotzim Mishlosha Dinarim. Aval Madir Chabeiro Sheyochal Etzlo, Ikal Memar, Shebedavku Humadira. So both say this is actually very interesting. You see, the way the Rana is understanding is as follows. What's driving Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov primarily, I will say, is this idea that when I say to Ruvain, if you don't come to my house for lunch, everything I own is usher to you like a carbon, or everything you own is usher to me like a carbon. He'll say, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds, that's Nidre Zeruzin, going back to our previous Mishnah. That's a neder that's made to get, it's a hyperbolic neder made to go ahead and get someone to take action, but there's never really intention that an actual neder should be made. No real intention. That's what's driving Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So we'll say, what's the shaila? The shaila is, do the Rabbanon agree that this case of making a neder to get someone to come over to my house for a meal, is that also Nidre Zeruzin? Or perhaps the only example of Nidre Zeruzin was with the purchaser and the buyer. Right? Rabbi say, remember again, where the seller says, the seller and the buyer, where the seller says, I'm not selling you this for less than 4 dinarim. And remember again, what does the buyer say? The purchaser says, I'm not buying this for more than, 4 seller. I'm not buying this for more than 2 seller. So there, I will say, we understand what they're both trying to do. It's clear. It's an established business practice. So maybe that's the case of Nidre Zeruzin. But in this case, when you're making a neder to go ahead and get someone to come over to your house, maybe it's a real neder. Maybe it's not Nidre Zeruzin. So that's the shaila. Did the Rabbanon agree with... So now let's read it again. Pligi Rabbanon Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Olo. do the Rabbanan argue about Elazar ben Yaakov or not? Furthermore, Vimtim Somer Pligi, and furthermore, again, if we say that halacha lamaisa, they argue, then what's the shaila? Hilchasa kavase olo. Who does the halacha follow? Does the halacha follow the Rabbanan or Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? So let's analyze. Tashma, Bo says we're going to do a couple of really interesting cases. So Tashma Disnan. Homer lechavero, top of Chav Dalet. I say to my friend, konam she'eni nene lecha im i'ata nota lebincha kor shel chitin u'shtei chavios shal yayin. So I said, listen to this case. Konam she'eni nene lecha. So first of all, look at the Ran. The way to show us sometimes what's complicated in these Nedarim is it's not even clear exactly how to translate it. Like what is it that the vower is saying? So the Ran helps us over here. So look at the Ran. Konam she'ani ne'nelecha, konam ma she'ani ne'ne mishalcha. So we'll say, if you can imagine, I go over to Ruvain and I say, Ruvain, it should be a konam. Any benefit that I get from you should be like a carbon, i.e., should be aser. So in other words, I'm precluding myself from getting benefits from any of Ruvain's possessions. Im i'ata nota lebincha. So it's interesting. So I said, Ruvain, I am making any benefits from you. Konam, aser to me. If you, Ruvain, don't take if you don't take from me, right, a core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine to give to your son. That's the case. In other words, so just to frame what's going on, I want Ruvain to take of my possessions to give to his son. So I tell Ruvain, if you don't take from my possessions, right? If you don't take a core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine to go ahead and give to your son, then I prohibit myself from getting any benefits from you or your possessions. That's the neder. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? So interesting. I can be matir my neder. So I could annul that neder, or call it annul that neder, even without a Talmid Chacham. They will say, what does that mean if I can annul that neder without a Talmid Chacham? What does that mean? It's not a neder. It's not a neder, right? Why? We'll say, why is that? Sheyachol lomar klum amarta ela b'shvil kvodi. Because we'll say, listen to this. Because the intended recipient, right? In other words, we'll say, there's a couple of things going on over here. First of all, why 1 core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine? So it's interesting. The Maharsha brings down, that's the amount of sustenance a person needs for a year, right? 1 core of wheat, 2 barrels, big barrels, right? Two barrels of wine is what it is that a person needs for a year. So essentially, I will say the other piece is, why is it that I'm saying to Ruvain, take this for your son? So we'll say again, the Maharsha points out over here something very interesting. I really intend to give it to Ruvain. That's really my intention, is to give it to Ruvain. But sometimes people are reticent to accept gifts. So instead, I make it about giving it to his son. So really what's happening over here is I, the vower, want to go ahead and convey a gift to Ruvain. And I say to Ruvain, essentially, if you don't take my gift, I'm going ahead and prohibiting any benefit from you. So now what does the Gemara say? Such a neder is not binding. Essentially, it's mutter. In other words, you could be matrit without a chacham, which means that it's not really a neder. So I will say, what's the pshat? Sheyachol lomar lo, because Ruvain, who's the intended recipient of these items, could say to me, Klum amarta ela b'shvil kvodi. He says to me, Silber, thank you. I understand why you're making this vow. You want to give me a gift. Right? You want to give me a gift. And for that, I have incredible gratitude. Right? So the Gemara says, ela b'shvil kvodi, zehu kvodi. Ultimately, again, the fact that you wanted to give me the gift, that's enough. Mission accomplished. Right? You wanted to honor me by giving me a gift. I don't even need to take it in order to go ahead and get the gift. Your simple willingness to give a gift, in and of itself, bestowal, which I will say, by the way, is such a profound yisod, because what the Gemara is saying is sometimes, just when someone knows that you want to do something nice for them, the knowledge that you want to do something nice for someone, in and of itself, is an incredibly profound chesed. So in this case over here, Ruvain says, I got it. You want to give me a gift? Mission accomplished. You don't have to give me the gift. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, Taima da'amar zeu kvodi. Now it sounds like the reason why this neder is not looked at as a real neder and it kind of becomes void on its own is because Ruvain says, I understand you want to honor me. So mission accomplished. Your willingness to give the gift has bestowed upon me honor. But it sounds like Reuven has to say this. Halav hachi, right? If he had not gone ahead and said this, so the Gemara says, nederhu. It sounds like the neder would have been a valid neder. Now, both say, what does this sound like? What kind of case does this sound like? This sounds like nidrei zeruzin, right? This sounds like a case where I don't really mean to make this neder. What am I doing? What's the objective here? What's the objective? I want Reuven to take my gift. That's my objective. Reuven's reticent to take a gift. So what do? I use a neder as a way to twist his arm to go ahead and take my gift. But this sounds like a nidrei zeruzin. But yet it sounds like the only way the neder is void is if Reuven says, I understand what you're trying to do. Thank you for giving me the honor. I'm honored just by willingness to give the gift. Done. But if he doesn't say that, it sounds like ultimately, again, the neder would go ahead and be in effect. We'll say, by the way, if you look at the Ran says, Klum amarta elam ibnei kvodi, second round from the top, Shes kabed al yodcha b'fnei abrios, sheyiru sha'ani chashuv be'einecha sha'atarot zelitini matana. In other words, Reuven says, the fact that you want to give me a gift is so beautiful, and the fact that you want to give me a gift makes me chashuv, important in the eyes of others. Zek kvodi. At the end of the day, fine, mission accomplished. So listen to this. So now, money. So we'll say, whose opinion does this reflect? Whose opinion is it that such a neder could potentially be a neder? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, nidrei zeruzin havi, can't be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Why not? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says in a case like this, what kind of neder is this? Nidrei zeruzin. Rabbi said this, because why? This case is no different than what? Making the neder. If you don't come to my house for a meal, all of my possessions are usher to you. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that's nidrei zeruzin. Same idea over here, right? If you don't take a quart of wheat and 2 barrels of wine for your son, I will not get any benefit from your possessions. Okay, that's nidrei zeruzin. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So we'll see who's the opinion that says that potentially this is a valid neder. So the Gemara says rather Ella shmamina pligi rabbanan ale. I will say it must be that this is the opinion of the Rabbanan. Ultimately, and what do you see? That the Rabbanan in fact argue on Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And I will say, what does it mean they argue? The Rabbanan don't argue on the concept of nidrei zeruzin. They just hold that nidrei zeruzin is really limited to one specific case, which is the marketplace case, right? That's where the seller says, I'm not giving you for less than 4 dinar. The buyer says, I'm not buying it for more than 2 dinar. That's the nidrei zeruzin case. But these cases, the Rabbanan hold, okay, these are a little bit crazy Nedarim, but Lamaisa, it's a real neder. To which the Gemara says, as follows: to which the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Olam, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Maybe not. It could very well be that this brisa is even according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. How so? So it's very interesting. Umodet Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov bahai de nidra habi. Shabbos say even Rabbi Elazar. Listen to this. Get ready for this. Even Rabbi Elazar, who normally holds we'll call of an expansive definition of nidrei zeruzin, right? Rabbi Elazar Yaakov holds of an expansive definition of nidrei zeruzin, which means what does it mean of an expansive definition? That it's nidrei zeruzin number one in the case of the marketplace, and these cases are also nidrei zeruzin. So 1 second. So we'll say, let's go back to this case. I go over to Reuven and say, Reuven, if you don't take a quart of wheat and 2 barrels of wine for your son, I'm never going to benefit from anything of yours. That sounds a lot like nidrei zeruzin. But yet Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, if Reuven comes along and says, I got it, you want to give me covered, mission accomplished, I've gotten covered, therefore again the neder is void. But so only if he says it is the neder is void, which sounds like if he doesn't say it, the neder works, which sounds like this is a real neder. So how could this be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? Watch this. So the Gemara says, Umod Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov b'hai dinidrahavi the Amar. Listen to this. The Amar lay lo kal ba'ana, because Rabbi say, I say to Reuven, do you know why I'm making this neder? Because I'm not a dog. Listen to this. The Amar lay lav kal ba'ana de mishanina minach v'lo mishanis minoi. Let's say this is incredible. Because I say to Reuven, I'm not a dog that I'm only going to take benefit from you, and ultimately, again, not give benefit back to you. Others will say, the Gemara's understanding over here is like this. This neder takes place in the context of a relationship, right? So what happens? I have a relationship with Reuven, and apparently what's happening over here is I've benefited from Reuven, and Reuven's not willing to take back from me. So I don't want that in a relationship. In a relationship, I want to be able to give as much as I take. And therefore, again, I say to Reuven, I'm making a neder. If you don't take 1 kor of wheat from me and 2 barrels of wine, I'm no longer benefiting from anything of yours. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that's a legitimate neder. That's legitimate neder. Why? Because Rabbi say, because I don't want to be a taker and not a giver. Which I will say, by the way, is such a, so we're gonna talk about this more in just a moment, but such an incredibly profound idea. I'm in a relationship with Reuven. I don't want to just take. I don't want to just take. That's not what a relationship is. That's what dogs do. Dogs take and take and take and don't give anything in return. Here we go. They give love. So do human beings, by the way, right? And spend more time with them, right? So give love. Right? So again. All right. So much to say, but I could. So the idea over here is that even Elazar ben Yaakov will say that halacha l'maisa, this is a valid neder, because again the vower. See, I both say, what's the chap of nidrei zerazin? The party making the neder he doesn't want the neder. He's trying to accomplish something else, and he's just using hyperbolic lashon. In this case, Elazar ben Yaakov said, no, I do want the neder, because at the end of the day, Reuven, if you're not going to let me reciprocate, then at the end of the day, I don't want to take from you anymore, because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to have a one-sided relationship where one party is always giving and one party is always taking. I don't want to be in a relationship like that. So in this case, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says this is a legitimate neder. Now, if Reuven comes along and says, Silber, your willingness to give me is beautiful, and that's giving me covet, okay, fine. Then we could say what? Mission accomplished. But Lamaisa, without that, even Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would say the neder is a legitimate neder. Incredible. So let's go back there. I'll say another case. Really interesting cases. So Tashma, ha'omer lechaveiro konam sha'atonanisli. So I say to my friend, konam sha'atonanisli, right? Ultimately, again, I hereby prohibit any benefit to you from my possessions. Im i'atonosin libni kor shalchitin ushtei chavio shayas. So I'll say this is the reverse case. I say to Reuven, I am making a neder prohibiting any benefit from my property to you, unless, of course, you give my son 1 kor of wheat and 2 barrels of wine. Okay, so what's the halacha? Rabbi Meir Omer, Achitin. Rabbi Meir says, halacha l'maisa. Okay, Reuven, if you don't give the kor of wheat and the 2 barrels of wine, Reuven is prohibited from benefiting from my property. The Chacham say, Avzeh yachol lahatir es nidro shelo api Chacham. The Chachamim say, ultimately, again, no, I have the ability to be matir that neder, to annul that neder, even without a Chacham, which we'll say is another way of saying it's not really a neder. Why? Sheyachol omar hareini ki'ilu hiskabalti. Because I could say to Reuven, okay, it's as if you've given my son these items, and therefore we are good. So we'll say, what's going on over here? So time of damar hareini ki'ilu hiskabalti. So the reason, ultimately, again, I could go ahead and annul the neder is why? Because I could say it's as if I've received. In other words, it's as if my son has received these items. Halav hachi. But I will say at the end of the day, if I don't say that, then what? Nederhu. Ultimately, you see this is a valid neder. And I will say once again, these things look like nidrei zerazin, but yet we see that they are valid nedarim. So, Mari, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, nidrei zerazin havi. If it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, then I will say this would fall into the category of nidrei zerazin. And nidrei zerazin are automatically void. Elalav Rabbanon. Rather, it must be the Rabbanon. Upligi. And I will say, what do you see? The Rabbanon argue on Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. I will say, remember again, our entire sugya is focused on one question, which is, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov has a more expansive view on the definition or the category of nidrei zerazin. What's our shaila? Do the Rabbanon argue on him or agree with him? And shaila number 2 is, if they argue, who does the halacha follow? So it sounds like over here, I will say that's what the Rabbanon are arguing. The Rabbanon are the ones who say that even in these hyperbolic cases, these are not nidrei zerazin, but rather, again, these are real nedarim. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. The Gemara said, lo. The Olam Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Wow. This could also be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So we'll say, remember again, this is case number 2. Case number 2, I say to Reuven, if you don't give my son a core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine. My property is like a carbon to you. Now we're suggesting, and I'm saying again, what was the halacha? The halacha was that if I say to, I could say to Reuven, okay, it's as if I received it, and then the neder is voided, right? The neder is done. But if I don't say it, the neder stands, which means this is a valid neder. To which the Gemara says, you know whose opinion this is? This is also Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. How can Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? Listen to this. Umod Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov behind Nidra Havi. Listen to this. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds that this case is a valid neder. Why? Listen to this. Mishum da Amerle, because I could say to Reuven, listen to this. Lav malka ana de mahanina lacha va'at lo mahanisli. I'm not a king. I'm not a king, right, who goes ahead and just gives you stuff and you don't give anything in return, right? Or to make it contemporary. I'm not the government, right, who goes in and gives you stuff and you don't give me anything in return. So I will say, so this is very interesting. This is very interesting. So what I'm saying, in this case over here, both of these Nedarim, interestingly enough, are voicing the vower's frustration, right? So in case number one, I'm making the neder, and I say, Reuven, if you don't accept my gift to your son of 1 core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, ultimately, again, I'm prohibited from getting any benefit from your property. And ultimately, Rabbi Yaakov says, even though that would normally look like Nidrei Zerizin, the neder works. Why does the neder work? Because I say, I don't just want to be a taker and not a giver. In case number two, I say to Reuven, if you don't give my son 1 core of wheat, 2 barrels of wine, you cannot get any benefit from my property. Why does that case work? Sounds like Nidrei Zerizin. Why? Because I say to Reuven, I don't want to be a king who just gives you everything and you never reciprocate. Absolutely incredible. And therefore, I will say, ultimately, again, both of these cases will work. I just want to point out something fascinating to you. So you see from here something fascinating, which is the midah of a dog. The midah of a dog is to take, right? The midah of a king is to give, So it's brought down in the Sefer Lekach V'Halavuv, something absolutely beautiful. He says, so listen to this. Mevuar, the Yisod midas hakelev hu inyan liyos mikabel mebli sheyitin la'azulas. The midah of a dog is to take and not to give back anything. V'hu inyan hakafoi tova. I will say that midah is kafoi tova, is to be an ingrate, right? Someone who only takes and never gives. Ultimately, again, that's a lack of gratitude. V'lachein, listen to this. V'lachein nikra amalek b'shem kelev. Amalek in the Medrash is called a dog. Because what's the midah of Amalek? The midah of Amalek is to take, and never give. He goes on, he says something absolutely amazing. He says, V'hefech mimidazu hu midas hamelech. Right? Ultimately, the opposite of the midah of a dog is the midah of a king. Because what does a king do? Yisod melech mashbia mibli lios mekabel. They will say, what's the job of a king? The job of a king is to be a mashbia, to give, and not to go ahead and be a taker. Yisod habitul hefech midas kelev va'amalek. So I will say, get ready for this. So he quotes the Gemara Masechah Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that when we came into Eretz Yisrael, there were 3 mitzvos that we were given. The first 2 Rabbosai was, number 1, lahamid melech, to establish a king, the limchos zaro shalamalek, and to wipe out Amalek. To establish a king and to wipe out Amalek. Listen to this. So Lekach V'Lavuv says something amazing. He says the order there is very specific. First you have to make a king, because what does it mean to make a king? To make a king ultimately again means to be a giver. To be a giver. And then afterwards, ultimately again, what's the goal? Ultimately again, to wipe out Amalek, which means to wipe out the midah of kafui tov, of being an ingrate, of wiping out the midah of being a taker. So I will say, establish a king, become a giver, and eradicate the midah of Amalek, of being a dog, of being a taker. Absolutely incredible. I will say, but what it teaches us is something so amazing. Number 1, that our goal, of course, is to be a melech, to be a giver, and not to be a dog, not to be a perpetual taker, but the way to eradicate one's dogkeit of being a constant taker is to transform one's self into a king, into a perpetual giver. What an incredible use, because we struggle with this, right? Everyone likes receiving, and it's easy to kind of transform. It's easy to kind of just become, a person just takes. Just take. It's easy. So how do you crawl out of that hole? So what the Gemara is teaching us is the only way to eradicate the midah of dogkite, the midah of amalekite, the midah of being a taker, is to transform yourself into a king, and to be a giver, and to be the kind of person who gives and constantly gives at every opportunity. Instill that midah of giving into yourself, and you will eradicate the dogkite, the Amalekite, the midah of Amalek within myself as well. I will say just one more piece. The Rabbi Shmuel comments on this, and he says something amazing. He says, this is why in Yomim Noraim, in davening, what do we say? We say, Zachrena l'chaim, melech chafetz b'chaim, v'kasveni b'sefer ha'chaim, l'mancha elokim chaim. Right? We ask Hashem for life. Right? Remember us for life. Zachrena l'chaim, melech chafetz, the king who loves life, and write us in the book of life. And then what do we say? L'mancha, for you, Hashem. They'll say, why do we add in that l'mancha? What do you mean l'mancha? Right? Why? I'm asking for life. You know why? So says the Shem Shmuel, you know why? Because if you just ask for life because you want life, that's being a dog. That's being a taker. But if I say, Baruch Hu, I want life, l'mancha elokim chayim. You know why I want life? I want life because Hashem, I want to tell you something. If you give me life, I'm going to give to you. Oh, suddenly now it's totally transformed. Suddenly now it's not a request, I'm not taking. But suddenly what I'm saying is, I want to give. I want to give. But in order for me to give, I have to have life. Without life, there's no giving. L'mancha elokim chayim. They'll say, what an incredible and overwhelming yesod. That ultimately, when we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for things, if I'm just asking, Chazal have an expression like this. Chazal say, so many people, they spend their relationship with Hashem, Savchin kekalba, that's lashon of the Medrash, barking like dogs. Barking like dogs. I'm asking, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. Don't be like that. Say, give me, but give me why? Why? If I could say, give me because I want to give. If you give me, then I will pay it forward, right? If you give me, L'man chelukim chaim, give me life so I could do something with it, then ultimately, again, I become a melech. Suddenly my request, I'm not just asking for something, but I'm asking for something so I can do something with it. L'man elokim chayim allows us to avoid becoming a kelev and transforming into a melech. Absolutely incredible. What says Gavaiter? Says the Gemara. Amarle Mar Kashisha, Braid Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. Tashma, another case. So we'll say, we still haven't answered our question. To the Rabbanan, arguing Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, not arguing Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Let's see. So it says the Gemara. Amarle Mar Kashisha, Braid Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. Tashma. Nidre own sin. So we'll say, we're going to get to this Mishnah. Nidre own sin. So we'll say, what's a Nidre own sin? Now, ones, remember again, is an extenuating circumstance. So what's an example of Nidre own sin? Hediru chaviru shiyochal etzlo. So we'll say, let's say this case. I went ahead and I made a neder to Ruvain that he has to come and eat by me. Okay, and what happened? V'chalahu ochala b'no. Ruvain gets sick, his son gets sick. Osha akva nar, or the river became swollen, he was unable to cross it. So the Gemara says, what's talacha? So in that case, again, he's not held accountable for transgressing the neder. Halav hachi nederhu. But both you see from here that without the extenuating circumstance, the neder that I say, Reuven, if you don't come over to my house to eat lunch, right? So the mice again, all of my property is usher to you, or all of your property is usher, whichever form the neder takes, you see that it's a valid neder. And I will say, whose opinion is this? Either Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Zeruzin Havi, it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and I will say this should be an example of Nidrei Zeruzin, right? Ella lav Rabbanon, rather it must be the Rabbanon, upligi. And I will say, what do you see from here? That the Rabbanon themselves only accept a very narrow scope or a narrow framework of Midrei Zeruzin. It really only applies in the marketplace cases. In all of these other cases, the Rabbanon are going to accept this is not Nidrei Zeruzin, rather these are in fact legitimate Nedarim. To which the Gemara says, no, the Olam Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, not necessarily, really it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Umis sarvis ta'adre mizamna lizamina. So I will say, listen to this. Do you think that it is, now literally again, we'll say, we'll use mizamna lizamina means the inviter to the invitee. Or let's just say a little bit differently. Do you think it's the host who is going ahead and making the neder against the guest? Lo, dizamina adre lemizamna. Interestingly enough, it's the guest who is making the neder against the host. The amarle, mizamanasli l'sudaseich. So we'll say what happens. Reuven comes over to me and says, tell me, Silber, are you inviting me over for a meal? Amarle in. I say yes. And then what happens? Neder ze alecha. So I'll say in that case, then interesting enough, what happens is then the invitee, right, the guest goes ahead and makes a neder, kind of creating a binding promise. The neder, and this is a neder, v'chalahu, and I'm sorry, v'neder, and v'nadar, and then it makes the neder, v'chalahu, then I will say the guest becomes sick, or his son becomes sick, or the river becomes swollen and impassable, hare elu nidre onsin. So we'll say this is a case of nidre onsin. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, so we'll say the case of nidre zeruzin would be ultimately where what? Where ultimately the host is making the neder to get the guest to do something. In this case over here, it's a little bit different. We're going to see this case later on, but this sounds like actually a case where the guest is making the neder to bind the host to his promise. Okay, so that's the case. So point over here is separate parsha. It's not nidre zeruzin. Good. So Tashma, yeser alkein. Yeah, by the way, if you take a look at the Ran says, Neder ze alecha, it's about 3-6, about 10 lines up from the bottom, Kilomar aser nechasech o nechaseh al atzmeich, im lo ta'asekein, v'neder hamezamein v'chalahu. So we'll say, so it's interesting. So the neder is still being taken by the host, but the neder itself is actually being initiated ultimately again by the guest. Okay, fine. The point for our purpose, I will say, is it's not nidre zeruzin, and therefore it does not help us in answering our question. Good, so let's go back there. So Tashma, yeser alkein, Amr Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Furthermore, I will say, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov said, what? What did he say? Fine. So yeser alkein, Amr Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, ha'omer lechavero, konam sha'ani nene lecha, im i'ata misareach etzli. So Rabbi will say, so listen to this. The Gemara quotes over here from right. Sorry. So they will say this is a quote. This is a quote from the Tosefta. So that's why it sounds somewhat similar to our Mishnah. So the Tosefta quotes our Mishnah, and then the Tosefta goes on and adds on another case. And here's the case. I say to my friend, I say to Ruvain, Konam sha'ani nenelecha, right? I hereby prohibit any benefit to you, right? Any. So remember, the lashon over here means I prohibit, right? I prohibit any benefit from anything of yours. Reuven, if you don't come to my house, and this here we get a little bit more specific, right? I hereby prohibit any benefit that I get from you like a carbon. If you don't come over to my house and eat with me warm bread, and drink a hot drink, right? And what will I say? What happens? V'halo hikpid kenegdo. So it's actually interesting. Now, what happened in this case? So now, in this case, Reuven gets upset and goes in and makes a parallel neder, right? Af elu nidre zeruzin. They both say this is also called nidre zeruzin. Wow. Okay. Here we go. So now, they both say we have an explicit tosefta. So now, what is the tosefta saying? Nedarim like this, where people are making nedarim against each other to get the other to come over to eat. This is a good example of nidre zeruzin. Nidre zeruzin. And I will say, what does the Tosefta say? Below hodu lo chachamim. The chachamim did not agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Okay, so my lo hodu lo chachamim. We'll say, what does that phrase mean? What does that phrase mean that chacham didn't agree? Amud beis lav da afilu bekamaisa ushmamina pligi rabbanon ale shmamina. They will say, what do you see from here? It means that the rabbanon don't agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Where? In any of these cases. Any of these cases, including, I will say what? The case we mentioned in our Mishnah. Okay, so I will say, so here we go. Now we finally have clarity. So here's what's happening over here. So I will say, what we're essentially saying is like this. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds, he has an expansive definition of nidre zeruzin. And essentially what he says, I will say, what is the definition of nidre zeruzin? What's the definition? Any case where it is clear that this person is making a neder. Why? To get someone else to do something. That's the goal. I'm trying to move the subject of the neder to do something. Now again, the paradigmatic case is I'm the seller. I'm trying to move the buyer from his price point of two dinarim to 3 dinarim. But Rabbi Elazar says it applies to other cases as well. So I take it and I say, Ruvain, if you don't come to my house for a meal, then ultimately, again, I'm never going to benefit from anything of yours again. Or you can't benefit from anything of mine, whichever lashon you want to use. In Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov's view, it's clear that what I'm doing is I'm trying to get Reuven to come over to my house. I don't really have in mind to make a neder. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Comes along the Rabbanan, and now we see the Rabbanan say no, and that's their lashon over here. The lashon is af elu nidre zerizin. So again, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov has this expansive view, but the Chachamim don't agree. I will say, what don't the Chachamim agree to? All of this stuff. The Chachamim only hold that the case of Nidre Zerizin is limited to the very specific case of what? The marketplace. All of these other cases are not Nidre Zerizin. They're not Nidre Zerizin. They're real Nedarim. The Gemara says, Shma mina, see from here that in fact the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So wonderful. I will say, so now we've answered question one. What's question one? Do the Rabbanan argue on Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov or agree? So now we've answered that. What's the halacha? They disagree. What was question number two? Who does the halacha follow? Right? Is like Rabbi Elazar, are these cases of Nidre Zerizin or not? So my Haviyallah, here we go. So Tashma, Dam Rafuna, halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. V'chin Amar Rav Bar Ava, halacha ki Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So Rabbi say, who does the halacha follow? So the Gemara seems to say the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and therefore again I will say we will expand the framework of Nidre Zerizin to include these cases as well. So therefore I will say halacha l'maisa. What the Gemara, so two pieces. Number one, it is a machlokes as to the scope of Nidre Zerizin. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says any case where it is clear that your primary intention is not to make a neder. Rather, your primary intention, is to do what? To get someone else to move from their current situation and act differently. That's called Nidre Zerizin. Chachamim disagree and they say no. Nidre Zerizin are only in the marketplace, but in any other context, ultimately, that is a real neder. Shabbos say, how do we paskin? The Gemara ends off by saying that we seem to paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, namely, that we adopt this more expansive view of Nidre Zerizin. And therefore, Nidre Zerizin will work in the marketplace, but it'll also work in these kind of cases where you're trying to get someone to come over for a meal, where it's clear, what's my intention, right? Reuven's reticent to come over. I want Reuven to come over. So I use the neder as a vehicle to move him, no different than when I am the seller, and I use the neder as a vehicle to move the buyer from his price point. Good Rabbi say that is the end of the sugya. Incredible. Mishnah, let's go. Nidre Havai. So Rabbi says, now moving down, remember again, two Mishnayos ago, we were introduced to the four categories of Nedarim. Go at the beginning of the parak, right? Remember again, the Mishnah said, Arba Nedarim Tir Chachamim. There are four categories of Nedarim which don't really even need revocation because pretty much they're void on their own. So we now went through the first category of Nidre Zerizin. And we'll say, what was the second category? Nidre Havai. That's what we're going to focus on now. So Nidre Havai. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. How do you translate Havai? So Havai usually sounds like it's translated as like nothingness. Here we're going to see really it's translated as a form of exaggeration. So we'll say, listen to this. So Nidre Havai, what's the halacha? So, or I should say, what's the case? So here we go. Amar, Konam imlo ra'isi badarach hazeh ke'olei Mitzrayim. So I will say an interesting case here. So literally again, Konam, an item should be usher to me if I did not see on this road like the number of people who left Egypt. Rabbi say, so what am I saying over here? Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. I'm sorry, there's one more line. Or if I haven't seen a snake the size of the beam of a press. So say, right, if you have like an olive press, right, or a grape press, you have a beam that's used to press down on the olives or the grapes. If I haven't seen a snake as large as the beam. Rabbi say, obviously both of these are hyperbolic or exaggerated statements. Look at the Ran. Nearly, the Tana Tre Gavni, Nakit Chad the Shaykh Beguzma, Tana Kolim Mitzrayim, David Inish Dechi, Chazi Inish Tuva Gazim, Famra Kolim Mitzrayim. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. The Oli Mitzrayim, I will say, is an example of an exaggeration. Why? Because it's normal, let's say when it comes to people, right? A person sees a large group of people, and it's normal to associate that large group with some other well-known large group. So right, I see a throng of people, it would be normal to say, you know what, this looks like the number of people who left Mitzrayim. That's a normal case of hyperbole. V'chad lo shayich be'guzma, tahainu nachash kekores beis habad, t'cheva de mefarshina be'gemara de lo nachash gadol ka'amar, ela taruf lo shayich le'meimar derech guzma taruf kekora beis habad, shenov. Then there's another example, right? With the snake, there is no such thing as a snake that's the size of the beam of a press. There's no such thing like that. So I will say, so that's going to be a level of exaggeration that's not hyperbolic, but just simply nonsensical. So there's just two examples of exaggeration, right? One we'll call hyperbole, and just one nonsensical. So I will say, so this is the example of so therefore if I say, right, konam ibo ra'isi b'derech hazeh, so ultimately again, so the neder itself also is an interesting lashon of a neder. This item should be prohibited to me for a benefit like a carbon if I have not seen on this road like the number of people who left Egypt. Okay, so you haven't seen the number of people, like the number of people left Egypt. Therefore what? The neder, there's no neder. There's no neder. That's what's happening over here. So Tana, let's analyze Tana. Nidre havai mutarin. Ultimately, I will say, so nidre havai, so a neder, I will say. So again, the reason why this neder, of course, is irrelevant is because I'm linking it to something which clearly did not happen, right? This item should become prohibited to me if I saw like the people who went ahead and left Egypt. Okay, obviously I didn't see the number of people who left Egypt. So therefore, Lamaisa, again, such a neder is just simply nonsensical and therefore not binding. So shvuas havai asurin. Oh, that's interesting. So we'll say, what about a shvuas havai? Right, so a shvua ultimately, again, that is linked to one of these exaggerated circumstances. The Gemara wants to suggest that such a shvua ultimately, again, would be asr. I will say now, when we say asr, what does that mean? Asr means it's a real shvua. So what's the case? Hechi dami shvuas havai. What's the case of a shvuas havai? Here we go. Ilema damar shvua lo ra'isi badarech hazeh. So I will say, if I say, I hereby swear, right? Now I will say, now again, remember, I'm not swearing about what I saw. What I'm swearing over here is about some other related item. And what I'm doing is I'm attaching the veracity of the shvuah im lo ra'isi b'derech hazeh. If I have not seen on this road ke'oleh Mitzrayim. But I will say, if that's what it is that you're saying, medem kamar, that is actually a truthful statement. Because Lamaisa, then I'm swearing that I did not see like the number of people who left Egypt. Okay, as strange as that's, in other words, the wording is strange, but Lamaisa, the statement is true. The statement is true. To which the Gemara said, Amar Abayi, no, what's the case? The Amar, Shvua Shira'isi. What's the case? I will say, where I take a Shvua, and I hinge this Shvua on the fact that I saw on this road, Ke'ole Mitzrayim, like the people who left Egypt. Okay, Samarle Rava, Im Kain Lama Li Lamemar. So I'll say, ultimately, again, what is exactly that the Gemara is coming to teach you? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Look at Rashi, Rashi on the left-hand side. Amarle Rava, Imkin mas nisedamar shvua shira'isi b'derech hazeh. We must be talking about a case where I'm taking a shvua, and the shvua is, I saw on this road, like the number of people who left Egypt. So Rashi says, Lama li l'meimar, da'aser, dahainu shvua gimura, vaday kilu amar shvua sha'achalti. So the Gemara says, so I don't understand, what's the case, right? We're trying to contrast over here nidre havai and shvuas havai. And we're saying ultimately again that nidre havai don't work, shvuas havai do work. So what's the case of shvuas havai? What's the case over here? To which the Gemara says as follows. To which the Gemara says, Amalei Rava, imkein lama li lememar, va'od, dumya de neder katani. Furthermore, I will say, the Gemara itself is linking the Nidre Havai with Shavuos Havai. So what's the case? Here we go. Ela Amar Rava, Ba'omer, Ya'asru Peiras Ha'olam Alai B'Shavua, Im Lo Ra'isi B'derech Hazeh Ke'oleh Mitzrayim. So Rava wants to suggest, Rabbi say, what's the case? The case over is where I say, the fruit of the world should be ushered to me with a Shavua, if I have Im Lo Ra'isi, if I did not see, like the people who left Egypt. So Rabbi say, is that a true statement? Is that a true statement? Yes. Why? Because I did not see the number of people who left Egypt. So Rabbi say, so therefore, effectively, I've made a binding shvuah, right? The fruit of the world should be ushered to me if I did not see on this road the number of people who left Egypt. Okay, you didn't see on this road the number of people who left Egypt, and therefore, ultimately, again, the shvuah is in fact a binding shvuah. I says the Gemara, Amrli Rabino Ravashi. So we'll say again, you could ask yourself, why would anyone talk like that or make a shua like that? Again, that's an irrelevant question right now. Right? The Gemara says, Amrli Rabino Ravashi v'dilma Hai Gavra Kina Deshumshani Chaza va'asik lahon shma oli mitzrayim v'shaper mishtaba. Now we'll say maybe at the end of the day, when the guy says ke'oli mitzrayim, right? Imlo ra'isi. If maybe what he means in he doesn't mean people. What does he mean? Ants. Maybe he saw just the whole grouping of ants, right? And I will say, saying, I've seen so many ants, like Olim Mitzrayim, like the Jews who left Egypt. And in fact, again, that is a valid lashon. We'll say top of Chav. Hey, we'll stop with this. Amrlei ki mishtaba adaita didan mishtaba va'ana lo maskina nafshna shumshani. I will say when people take a shvua, the lashon we use both by shvuas and nedarim is normative language that people use. And people do not go ahead and call a large colony of ants like those who left Egypt. So we'll stop over here for today. We're kind of leaving off Mitzugya, so we're just trying to figure out as follows. We have this concept now of Nidre Havai and Shvuas Havai. And the Gemara wants to suggest Nidre Havai will not work. Shvuas Havai can work. Trying to figure out the case of Shvuas Havai, Bosai, Emir Hashem still be continued. Shkoyach. All right, Chavron Zoom, have a great Shabbos, everyone.